Okay, I'd like to call this City of Urbana Council Committee of the Whole to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Ammons?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
Mr. Madigan?
Here.
Ms. Marlin? Mr. Roberts? Mr. Smythe?
Here.
Mayor Pressing?
Here.
Are there any additions to the agenda? Staff report at this time? Anyone? There. Okay, moving on. Approval of minutes of previous meeting, September 8, 2014.
So moved.
It's been moved by Michael Madigan. Was there a second? Seconded by Carol Ammons. Any corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Minutes are approved. Next up, public input. Anyone from the public? And as before, there is nobody today. We must be losing our popularity or something.
Oh.
We need to be more entertaining. Next up, we have an ITV3 update report from Levi Dinkler and Brandon Bowersox-Johnson. And Brandon, we all know who you are, but if you'd introduce Levi, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good evening. Thanks for having us. Yeah, I'm Brandon Bowersox-Johnson, so I'm one of your 3 representatives to the UC2B board, and I'm glad to have Levi Dinkler here. He is from ITV3 and from the Peoria area, but he's here an awful lot these days, and so we really welcome him to the community.
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to
Good
just
be
give a quick update on what UC2B and ITV3 have been up to, and then answer any of your questions. So let's see, first off, if the slides go through, I want to just give some big picture background, and then Levi's going to talk a lot specifically about some things that have been happening here in the community for ITV3. As you probably know, it was last October when UC2B transitioned into being a not-for-profit and started working really heavily on this expansion, how we could find a way to work with a private partner to serve more neighborhoods in Champaign-Urbana. And at the end of May this year, we announced this partnership with ITV3 that we are thrilled about. They're obviously a company, as you probably remember, that has experience operating fiber-to-the-home networks and providing super fast internet as well as TV and phone service. And they're local, an Illinois-based company that's just been a really good steward and part of Family Video that already has been a taxpayer and a job provider here in Urbana and has 2 stores here and 1 store in Champaign. So that was announced in May, and we have been aggressively pursuing a whole bunch of transition and details and pass-offs and handoffs in the months since then. By July of 2014, ITV3 was officially servicing the customers, sending out monthly bills, and when people called on the phone, those phone calls were being routed to ITV3's staff. And by September, by this month, this is the first month that ITV3 has been operating the entire network core. You might know that the University of Illinois staff were part of operating some of the core routers and the core infrastructure of the network through the end of August, and they sort of officially handed over the keys. And so now ITV3 is really operating everything, including the network core, starting this month. So those have been some huge transitions for us, and we're eager now to really focus on the biggest goal here. We still want to bring fiber optic internet to every single neighborhood of Champaign and Urbana so that it's a choice for every resident and every business here. And it's going to take getting the word out. We need your help, and so that's why we're here to provide an update. But that is our goal, and now that this transition and a lot of things are dealt with, we can really focus on that, on getting the message out and helping people get signed up and get their neighborhoods connected. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Levi to give a little more of the kind of the stuff that's been happening behind the scenes as they've taken over operating this network and getting it in good shape for growth, and now are ready to really get the word out.
Thank you. So unless you happen to be one of about 12 or 13 people working on this transition, it appears like there's not a whole lot being done. I assure you, if you're one of those 12 or 13 people, this has been the most hectic time in my recent memory. It's been great dealing with UC2B. But in any case, a lot is being done. There were significant challenges in engineering. We are basically re-engineering the network to provide service to every single residence and business and basically parcel in both communities. That is largely done at this point. We are in a position now where we can go and we can build neighborhoods if the penetration is there, the customer needs are there. So we're in a much better place today than we were 90 days ago with that. Network documentation. One of the challenges is that a lot of the records were kept in a format that was basically incompatible with the system that we use to read maps. And so we've had to go and do some actual eyes-on documentation. If you've seen any of our vans or trucks in the community and you've seen our employees out there and they're pulling out cases and looking in there, what they're doing is they're verifying that the documentation that we have is accurate. One of the philosophies that we have that's important to understand, I know everybody wants this to be done and built and ready to everybody today. We would rather do it right and be methodical than to skip over something and put us in a position where we can't provide the level of service that our customers are going to expect of us. Even though we're a technology company, we like to think that the heart of our business is customer service, and that starts with being able to provide the speeds and the quality of service that our customers are signing up for. And that's been a significant challenge as well. We're dealing with new vendors, some that are more responsive than others. And so through that process, we've determined in talking to engineers and multiple vendors that we need to actually reconfigure the core of the network so that it can support the customer base that we expect to have here in the communities. So we're actually taking the actual core of the network, so think about the computers that run everything, basically, and we're reconfiguring that, and we're having to do that in a way so that no current customer ever has a loss of service. Luckily, the way that the core of the network was designed is such that we are able to do that while upgrading its capacity. And when I say upgrading the capacity, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of times more capacity than the current network has today. As Brandon mentioned, we're transitioning operations, and that I feel has gone pretty well. Another note there is preparing for TV service. Now, we're doing well just with the internet alone, but our model is to go and seek television franchise agreements, and we've initiated that process with both communities.
So yeah, this is a picture of one of the ITV3 staff over in, I believe this is in Champaign, checking out and inspecting and documenting some of the network. And so the focus now really is on signing up next, and the winter is coming soon. So we have worked between UC2B and ITV3 in really looking at what neighborhoods already have a concentration of signups and a lot of folks interested, and starting to do door-to-door there, starting to make a push there, and hoping to get multiple neighborhoods in Champaign and in Urbana over the threshold so that construction could still happen before winter. And basically the end of October is the last point to do that. So we're really putting a fall sign-up period pressure on between now and the end of October to really rally neighbors, and you're going to see a lot happening. Levi will talk about things a little more, but you hopefully got a copy of this flyer. That's one information piece that's out there. In a second, we can show you some pictures of some yard signs and a lot of other things happening.
Sure. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, well, how come there's not billboards up all over and TV and radio? And we operate a sizable network throughout the greater Peoria area today. One of the first lessons we learned early on is that when we did mass advertising, we created more resentment in the people that didn't have it available to them immediately than we did goodwill in the people that we were trying to drive to sign up. So what we've learned over time and have applied in subsequent cities is that we go in with this, hey, spread the word of mouth. We find out where the hot spots are in the community, and that's where we go and we pinpoint our resources. So that's door-to-door salespeople. That is also things like direct mail. That is things like targeted internet advertising that, believe it or not, you can do right down to specific neighborhoods in a community. So that's what we're doing now. And we just started doing the door-to-door this past week in one of our targeted markets or neighborhoods. In the initial results have been fantastic. We talked to 33 people, 33 homeowners last week, and 14 of them chose to get service. So that's internet only with some telephone. And so far, the gigabit service has been the most popular service that people are getting. So we're really, really excited. We think that now as we're hiring more canvassers in the community and getting more and more people to put the word out, we can target more areas. And we look forward to building some areas of the community here before the end of the year.
Yeah, I had a picture of, you might see yard signs like this. You might also see some of those canvasser staff that Levi mentioned going around door to door in orange. We have had some coordination with the cities and the police too to know when they'll be out, just so that people know to be expecting staff going door to door in orange shirts. And we'll also try to get the word out through all of you to neighborhood listservs and things like that to let you know when there might be people in your neighborhood. Some of the highest concentrations where the door-to-door is starting when UCB and ITV3 sat down and looked at the maps in Champaign and Urbana. Some of the highest concentrations were in wards 1 and 4 and 7, and I think the sector that the mayor lives in. So those are some of the areas that might have door-to-door, those folks with orange shirts and these orange yard signs showing up sooner than later to try to really start where there were pledges and where there were already some momentum of people signing up, and give those neighborhoods the first door-to-door folks going through and really trying to get them over the hurdle.
Something I think is important also to mention is just because we've targeted the first ones where it's most popular now, if this neighborhood over here all of a sudden gets really popular, we'll put the resources on it. I mean, I'd love nothing more than to have the problem of having to hire a bunch of people because it's just everybody wants it everywhere. And so that is important to remember, even though we're talking about starting out in more of a pinpoint area. And when we're talking about 4 neighborhoods, we're talking about a little bit over 1,200 homes here this year.
Okay, so last but not least, some of the key questions that we get. One is about how to sign up, and I just want to make sure briefly that it's clear. So the idea is anyone in anywhere in Champaign or Urbana can go online and pretty easily sign up. You only have to answer 1 or 2 questions at a website, and it is called theperfectupgrade.com. If people already had been part of the previous pledge drive and signing up before, well, then you're fine. You're already signed up. But if not, you can go to this website and answer a few questions. You get to choose and say whether you want gigabit internet or whether you might be interested in phone service, or even check a box if you might be interested in TV service, and that would be forthcoming, and sort of say what your interests are. You also do have to provide a credit card number, and this is one of the questions we get a lot, so I just want to be really clear. You don't pay anything, nothing is charged to you until after ITV3 calls and schedules your home installation. But the system does ask for a credit card number just to prove that you're a real person and not just randomly typing in addresses and signing things up. So you don't pay anything until ITV3 contacts you and schedules a date to come plug your home in and get you all set up.
And that actually happened. That's why we have that rule. We had a very enterprising young man that signed up literally every person on his block to falsely get us to build there. Another one of probably the most popular questions that we get is 50%, is that realistic? I can tell you that in our other markets where we do not even provide gigabit service today, where our top package is 100 megs, we currently do see 50%. The best way I like to put it is, you think about who the traditional monopoly cable company and telephone company are in town. You go survey 10 people, any 10 people, and you say, how many of you love those companies? And see how many people say, yeah, I love doing business with them. So when people have an option, and as long as we provide good customer service and we've got a good competitive package for them, people are very willing to make that choice to support the community and to support ITV3 and bringing this to the area.
Real quick, maybe one last thing. I'll show that website, theperfectupgrade.com. It looks something like this. You can, well, okay, it didn't come across on the screen. You can pull up The Perfect Upgrade.
You have to scoot it over. There it is.
There we go. Okay, great. So you can pull up theperfectupgrade.com, and it looks something like this and lets you easily go to the bottom and put in your zip code and say where you live, and then it lets you make a couple simple choices about whether you might like phone service or other kinds of service. And it also has a map where you can go look at the whole community and see where in the community there is service. And so right now, I believe we're about this week to cross the 1,000 signups from Urbana and about 1,500 from Champaign. We're just a few shy in each community, so that would put us this week at a total of 2,500 people in both communities that have signed up, which is great. So you can follow along on this map and see how many people in your neighborhood still have yet to sign up, and sort of watch the numbers grow as you talk to your neighbors. So it's a pretty simple process of signing up, and the most important thing to understand is that you do enter a credit card number, but you aren't charged anything until you would get a call to schedule your home's connection. And really, this lets any neighborhood have their say. If they want gigabit internet and if they want the fastest internet in the country, every neighborhood's got an equal chance to go out and get it just by spreading the word. So
Okay.
with that, we're happy to answer any
I think
questions.
the mayor has a question first here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about, you said that TV will come later. Do you have some kind of estimate on when it would be available?
I would say we're in discussions with both communities, and they've been very productive so far. I don't feel prepared unless city staff is ready to, if Mr. Simon is ready to share anything, but I can't give that projection.
Oh, okay. And is the phone service comparable to landlines?
Correct, yes.
So you don't have the same problem that, well, if you go over the internet, there's supposed to be a problem on people talking and then getting, that it's a one-way.
This isn't that type of telephone service. It's more of a traditional telephone service. It is, we use what's called SIP technology, but it's a secure connection. It's not going out over the open internet. It's a dedicated channel, and we've got plenty of capacity on the fiber optic lines to be able to provide that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions here from council members? I know that Diane Marlin sent a couple of questions. I don't know if you're prepared to address those, and I don't
Sure.
have. Okay, if you can, that'd be great.
One was the 50%, and she was concerned about that. And I think our initial results, talking to 33 people, we signed up 14. By the way, that doesn't mean the rest of them said no. There's plenty of those people that said, hey, you know what, this sounds like something we want to think about, come back in a week. So, but 14 said yes, first contact, which was fantastic. So that tells me, I think 50% is very realistic in Urbana. I'm trying to remember her other questions.
I think it was related to people who put in money up front. Why aren't they getting some kind of priority here?
So when neighborhoods get built, we are going to prioritize the installation of the people who were the core, founders and contributors that put in their $100 or more in some cases. And yes, they are going to get priority installation.
I know that some of those those priorities drove some of the neighborhood groups up in particular, though they get split up in the modeling here,
Yep.
or in the neighborhood modeling that was done. You might want to talk about how the neighborhoods were created too.
Correct. Yeah, that was another one of our questions, was about the map. And this is a really important thing to understand about the engineering process. We build in groups of 350 or 175 for technological reasons. That's the technology that we use. That's the best way to build. So our challenge is to take the fiber that UC2B had and be able to distribute it throughout the community, keeping in mind future growth and things like that, and have these units of 350. There could be a box in your front yard, and you may be in this group over here because you're not being distributed from that box. It may not be the most technically feasible place. People want to know, is the map absolute? No, it's a changing, living document. We may get out into an area and discover that 10% of the parcels don't have homes on them, or that there's a significant number of commercial properties. And then we'll revise that so that we want to do everything we can to hit the number to build. And so does that answer, I think?
Yeah, and then Carol has a question.
Sure.
I wanted to just ask Brandon one on the Community Investment Fund that I know remained incomplete when I left.
Yeah. That is one of the things still underway. So we had a very busy summer just getting the transition to happen, and I feel like that went smoothly. We didn't leave customers in the lurch. You know, service kept working, and when you called on the phone, one day it was us, and the next day it was ITV3, and we got through that phase of it. Now we're really making a push first on this marketing, and through the end of October, trying to get neighborhoods signed up in town. The Community Benefit Fund planning is still happening. And we have not yet announced an initial schedule for grants or for spending those dollars, but that will come next. So once I think we get through this October push, where we're putting a lot of energy, I really do, and the whole board does, want to get the Community Benefit Fund really up and rolling so that people can start to see their dollars at work and see it making an impact in the community.
And then if I can just ask, what's the cost of the phone service? I didn't realize that phone service was
The
part of
phone
it.
service, basically, you take any internet package and add $9.95 to it, I believe.
Oh, really?
Or $14.95, I apologize, $14.95
Okay.
to it, and that gets you unlimited nationwide calling.
Oh,
You get a discount if you go with gigabit service, I
okay.
believe. Yeah.
Unlimited nationwide, you said, and.
And Canada. Unlimited
Canada.
nationwide and Canada, yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
And as far as your phone is concerned, and back to the concern about internet phones, your normal phones that you use today, that you plug in, your phone doesn't know it's any different. It's a secure connection, and it's not the VoIP horror stories that you hear about. It's a completely different technology.
Thank you.
So if you call long distance, you don't get extra charges?
Correct.
If you don't use your phone or you use it all day long, you're still going to pay $14.95?
Correct.
Oh, my goodness, thank you.
Yes.
You shouldn't say that to a politician who's good on the phone. Mike Madigan.
So, regarding the phone numbers, does your company sell the phone numbers for marketing purposes?
So no, we don't sell any of our customers' information. No.
Okay,
Period.
because the first thing that happened to me when I became an alderman, I thought, man, I need to have a home phone. I haven't had one for years. Plug it in, and within, I don't know, 3 minutes, a phone call. And that's all I get. Over and over and over again, marketing calls. So my current carrier, Comcast, my current carrier definitely sells their numbers, so I had to have it disconnected. So I was just curious about that.
No,
So thanks.
I think coming back, being a family-owned company from Illinois, one of the things, and this goes back to our video stores too, because we had a lot of information, a lot of things back before big data that, was very valuable and companies would want to pay for, but we felt that'd be a violation of the trust of our customers. And so that carried over into this business. We think that's a way to separate ourselves from a customer service standpoint as well, by not selling data and not making you sign agreements.
That doesn't stop the automated computer generation that just goes, starts out with, this 367-0000.
Totally understand, but it doesn't expedite the process. of
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So,
Mayor.
Would you have to have a different phone number than what you have right now, or can you keep the same number?
You can keep the same number.
And are there any listings of these
Yeah,
numbers?
we can list.
I mean, do you have a book, or how do,
We're a telephone company.
Okay.
Actually, that's what we are. We're a telephone company in the state of Illinois. We're a competitive local exchange carrier. So as part of that, we list with 911. We can get you listed in the phone book as well. Do we put out a phone book? No.
so you would be in the same phone book as AT&T?
Correct. Yes, you can do
Interesting.
that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for your
Thanks
time.
for having us.
Yes.
And continuing on our list of reports, we have a building safety housing report. And John's going to take the front and center here. Okay. Jump right in, whoever's starting.
John Schneider is going to give a report on building safety and housing programs and some follow-up from previous legislation.
Good evening. I placed at each one of the dais for you this document. It actually has copies of the ordinances that I refer to, and then on the back page is a copy of our ticket report. What I'd like to talk about first is the rental registration fee. On October 21st, 2014, 11 months ago, Council approved the ordinance that adjusted the rental fee schedule, and this resulted in a net gain or net fees increase of $67,405 from the previous year. The adjusted fee schedule allows for a waiver of the registration fee for properties that received an inspection grade of A, and we had 3 of those in this past year. Since the ordinance was passed, those were the only 3, and there were 2. There was 1 in October and then 2 more recently. One thing of note for this ordinance, it indicated that the fee adjustment would expire 1 year from the date the ordinance was passed, which in essence would be October 21st, 2014. The adjusted fees were included and approved in the 2014-15 schedule of fees at the same rate as it was in October of last year. So for the coming year, they've already been approved. We're asking for the rate to remain in effect for 2015 in order to continue the increased effort for code inspection and code enforcement in the city. So if you have any questions about that portion of it, I'd be happy to answer those.
Could you say how much the fee went up? What
Well,
was the increase?
The increases vary. I think they, I don't have the, well, maybe I do
The
have
basic
the previous.
one went up by what,
Well,
$5 or
it was-
$10 or something?
I think it was $5.
Okay, thank you.
For a single family.
Okay,
The
thanks.
duplexes went up $10.
Okay,
And then
thanks.
the multifamilies went up a little bit more than that.
Eric, then Mike.
So how do these property, how do these violations compare with a year ago, at the same period a year ago?
I apologize, I don't have my building safety report for last year. The violations, I could actually probably get that on the website.
I think we have more to report, and then
Yeah.
on the violations. I know the
Well,
tenant
that's a good
complaints are very similar from year to year. I think there were 40 last year. This year so far, 45, but this is like a nine-month review on the complaints, so I don't know if that helps.
I guess I'm just looking for a trend, but do I hear you say that it's too early to tell?
I think we average about 50, well, if you're talking about complaint violations, 50 complaints a year. The number of violations depends on the number of inspections we're able to complete each year. And one of the factors that affects it is a multifamily that's been inspected before. The owners are, in essence, trained. They understand the process. You might have 10 units in one visit. They can get through those 10 units fairly quickly. When we get into areas like Area 22, the Learman neighborhood, where it's mostly single family, it takes a lot longer to do those because each one of those each one of those inspections takes longer because it's single family, and sometimes the owners need to be educated about the process because it might be their first time through. So in essence, it probably is too early to tell if there are any trends. It'd probably be easier to tell when we get through all the areas.
I mean, what we're all after is that the housing stock should become better, that people are living in better conditions. And so I'm just looking for some sort of marker in these numbers as whether we're moving towards that or not.
Why don't we, yeah, let's.
Well, that'll be part of the next
let's
part.
try.
Maybe
Yeah,
talk about
okay,
it
you
part
can
of the
make
next
some
part.
notes here. Mike, do you want to ask your question now or when they're done? Okay, so why don't we get through the report then? Though you hinted at something, do we need an ordinance to fix?
Based on our discussion with legal staff today, my understanding is that if you wanted to change from what was approved last October, because it was in the ordinance that was approved for schedule of fees in July, as of July 1st, we would need an ordinance to change it to something different than what was approved.
And the ordinance the schedule of fees has the new numbers in it, right?
Correct.
Correct, okay.
Correct.
So we don't have to do anything unless we really
Right.
want to. Okay, got it.
Right.
Thank you.
I do have a question on
okay.
that point.
Yeah, Mike.
So there was, in essence, a sunset provision of the
Correct.
fee increase. And so what you and legal counsel are saying is that the vote on the schedule of fees overrode that sunset provision.
I think that's correct. However, that's one of the reasons we're reviewing this with council now, is there's still an opportunity if council decides that they want to change the fees, we can do that before that October 21st deadline.
Okay, I'll reserve the rest of my
Okay.
questions.
Remember, the billing for rental registration happens in October, fee schedule happens in June, and then we're doing the 6-month review that we were able to conduct at this time, so.
Okay, sorry, John. Keep going.
So when we get into the failure to comply on October 7th, council passed ordinance 2013-09082, which is a copy is also attached. And that amended the Code of Ordinances, what we call our adopting ordinance, and included a directive that we would do a 6-month review. And we've completed that 6-month review of effectiveness. And I can just provide information in that time from October 8th, which was the day after the change, through June 30th. A total of 45 tenant complaints were filed with the city. And that resulted in a total of 341 code violations. And the copy of that report is the very last page of your report. It has the addresses and the violation numbers for each address. Typically, with that, you can see when the dates of the date the violation or complaint was filed, the date the first notice was given or sent to the property owner, and the date that was cleared. Now, the clear date could also include, we have 3 different types of violations. Violation includes life safety. That's, I believe it's 1 to 5 days, depending on the violation. Livability could be 5 to 10 days, or routine maintenance up to 30 days. So that can conceivably mean that the inspector would visit the property up to 4 times to get the clear. So there might be a little difference in when the clear notice is sent. Once all the violations are cleared, the inspector sends out the clear notice. So the inspector goes in, conducts an inspection based on the tenant complaint, and then they note any other violations they see during that time, and then they notify the owner, and then the owner's obligated to resolve those issues by the time the different deadlines, or if there's only one deadline when the inspector returns. If they don't do that, then the inspector issues a failure to comply ticket. And with that failure to comply ticket, depending on what the violation is and the turnaround time, there are different amounts that are assessed. As an example, it's a 1 to 5 day, I believe it's a $600 fine, which was doubled the amount that it was in the previous adopting ordinance. So basically, with that process all in place, staff was only issued 4 failure to comply tickets from October 8th, 2013 through June 30th, 2014. Only two of those were issued for tenant compliance, code violations that were not corrected within, tenant complaint code violations were not corrected within the time frame. 1 ticket was issued to a property owner to failure to register a property as a vacant structure, and this has been a problem property. And what happens is if they don't pay, that's the 1 ticket that was on the failure to comply report that hasn't been paid. If they don't pay, we work with finance to send out a notice that says, hey, you're late, you need to pay this amount, which in this case is $450, and if they don't respond, then we turn it over to our legal staff, and they take whatever collection process they deem would be effective, I guess. So basically, and then 1 ticket was issued to a non-rental property. It was an owner-occupied for failure to abate code violations that were noted on the exterior of the property. One important point is that no failure to comply tickets were issued for the 637 systematic inspections that also took place during that time period. Those are both initial and follow-up, as I explained earlier. So after reviewing everything, all the information that we have on hand, we believe it's been effective. Our staff believes that when the owner receives a letter that says that staff will issue a ticket if these aren't abated by the time they return for the scheduled inspection, then the owners have responded pretty positively and have as you can see with 4 tickets issued, have really solved the, resolved the complaints and taken care of business. So with that, we are recommending that we don't need to take any action. We think that the changes that were made by council have been very effective and increased compliance.
Questions? I know, Mike, you had one.
Yeah, and just so, I think the question earlier was how much were the fees increased? Well, I know it's hard to tell because there are different fees, but if you aggregate them and just look at your revenue, you have a 25% increase in revenue. So I don't know if that correlates to the fee necessarily. There's probably a different number of rental units now than there was then, but I would imagine that's negligible. So I would say roughly a 25% increase. How many rental units are there in Urbana? I know it's probably an unfair question right now.
I can give
Ballpark?
a ballpark of 9,600.
Okay.
9,600 dwelling units.
I know the registrations did go up, so that's part of the increase there.
Right.
And so if you look online, we just posted the 2013, but it has a 5-year series for this report, and it includes those rental registration numbers.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't have it handy with me, so I just wasn't trying to interrogate, just curious. So that's my rough math, my meatball math is that's $28 per year per unit is about what the cost is of the program. I'm sorry, not of the program, the cost of the fees on average. If there's 9,600 units and there's $269,000. So, sure.
No, well, I think Libby was saying that the number of registrations did go up also. So
Oh,
that-
yeah. Okay, so yeah, the 25% may, like I say, is probably not accurate based on the increase. but-
Discounted a little bit
Sure.
for that
Okay.
change. Yeah.
Let's say 22, 23,
Yeah.
maybe 24.
Yeah.
But my only point here is it's $28 per unit is the fee. So what, $250 a month? $233, a little over $2 a month. So I'm coming around to your way of thinking here, is what I'm saying.
Excellent. Oh, we like that.
It seems to me not to be overly onerous, and it is effective. I still do continue to have problems with anecdotal things like my favorite one being a resident called me, and one of their units was the tenant complained, and the inspector came and found a couple of violations in common area, which is a thing that happens over and over and over again, and it's caused by the tenants and the people who visit them. But then when the actual unit was inspected, the side of the stove was laden with grease, and the inspector ordered the landlord to clean it. It's things like that, because it's potentially a fire hazard or something, I guess. It's things like that that I just continue to have issue with. It's clearly something caused by the tenant. The inspector's, response was, well, you should have a security deposit so you can have it professionally cleaned. But we all know that most of those security deposits end up being eroded and dwindle down over time as things are fixed and they don't get replenished. And the landlord may or may not require an increase in that security deposit based on the income of the resident. So, I think those are the kind of things that we need to continue to work on and make sure the landlords aren't being penalized for blatant acts of the tenant in the unit. In my humble opinion, that person ought to be able to be evicted if they don't clean that up. It's that simple to me. I'm sure Esther would have a difference of opinion. But, something that a tenant is causing, I don't think the landlord should be made to clean up their mess. So that said, I'll leave it alone.
Carol.
Just going to take a 30-second interlude and congratulate you and Libby on really being able to implement this. I think it actually saves a lot of staff time, as a matter of fact, to have it there because we have so few tickets. So as opposed to maybe a higher number of tickets that you got to deal with. So I think it's very good, and I don't think we have to make any motion for council on this because it's just an update. But I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So does this become an annual report to us? I forget whether we require further reports.
No, but we can certainly do that. We have the written report, and I think it makes sense to have John come from time to time and give an update once we get numbers to present.
Yeah, it'd be.
So in the written
keeping it-
report
Yeah.
online, there's a summary of all the building safety activities, not just the housing. There's a cover memo that has that summary. It's online in the community development under building safety. There, all the reports for the past 5 or 6 years, I think, are
Yeah.
on.
And I suspect that once we have a few more numbers here, those of us who are so inclined can probably help come up with some ways of looking at the data. I'd love to do a little data mining and getting some comparisons. So, Mike, did you have another?
Yeah, just one follow-up. My only point about raising the point that we passed the ordinance with a sunset and that we passed a fee schedule, which, in effect, those two things are in conflict now. So I think it probably is, not being a lawyer, I think the smart thing to do would be to go ahead and pass an ordinance that either extends that sunset or removes it, so that the ordinance is not in conflict with the fee schedule.
Jim, what say you?
I think you can go either way, to be honest with you. You've passed the fee schedule, which approves the various fees to be charged in the program. And that fee schedule is incorporated in our ordinances and is available online. If you want to be hyper conservative about it, you can take one of the approaches that Mike has recommended to clarify any potential ambiguity or alleged conflict.
To follow up on what Mike's thinking, I think it would be nice and neat and clean if we just simply had an ordinance of some kind or whatever is appropriate, a resolution that simply moves the sunset, removes the sunset and puts this into the schedule of fees so that it's part of that annual review.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that the sunset was just so that we all could see, get a review after the first year. So really, I would agree that I don't see any purpose in extending the sunset, just of technical ordinance repealing that sunset, that date in the ordinance
Okay,
would suffice.
is Jim?
We can work with John and Libby on that. It would be a fairly simple ordinance. The only additional provision to remove the sunset provision or repeal the sunset provision, and then we would add probably one additional provision that the fees for rental registration shall be set as part of the regular process of adopting fees, unless Libby has a different reason for a different time frame.
Okay. Could we accept that as a consensus of the council, and they'll bring it to us when it's ready? Carol?
I don't know if we can actually act on that without it actually being on the agenda to
Well,
make an action.
Well, no, it's just asking staff to bring us a motion back to committee that meets this provision. This is committee level.
But we're not voting on that, so that's just an instruction. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
you're in the
staff
committee
motion.
of the whole right now anyway.
Yeah.
You're sitting as a committee of the whole, so, a directive is fine, and we'll accept the directive.
So,
Okay. Eric?
so I just am moved to respond a little bit to Mike. It seems to me, Mike, perhaps, that the particular instance that you're talking about is probably best dealt with in the wording of the lease. That is, whose responsibility is to do what in the event that there's a violation that's the, tenant's responsibility. I'd hate to have to try to write a statute that would cover all those instances. So I'm turning things back on you, Mike. I'm saying that should be in the private sector.
Well, that'd be great if the lease would be ultimately controlling, but city ordinances and the courts, I think, would have the final say in that stuff. You can put all you want in that lease, but only so much of it's going to pass legal muster, and I think that would be one of these instances where
Well,
The
having
landlord
eaten
would
the
have
costs,
few remedies.
having eaten the costs of my son not cleaning up after himself on a security deposit, I know it can be in the lease. So staff knows what to do. Thank you, John. We'll move on to the next item, which is an enterprise zone presentation. And Brandon Boyce, and Libby Tyler will do that.
Brandon will be making this presentation, and this is actually one of several that he and Kate Ferrer have been doing, providing updates to potential partners for our new enterprise zone. So we want to provide you with that information, and Brandon's here and Kate is out of town on important business, so
Oh, yeah, we might.
she's getting married, but you can congratulate her when you see her next.
All right. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of activities that staff has been working on in preparing a new application for an Urbana Enterprise Zone. And as Libby mentioned, a big shout out to Kate Ferrer, our colleague in economic development, who's really done the majority of the heavy lifting on this project. So what is the Enterprise Zone? It is an economic incentive authorized by the state of Illinois, first put into effect in 1985. The obvious purpose is to try to stimulate economic growth, create jobs, revitalize depressed neighborhoods. And in order to do this, local municipalities are authorized to exempt state sales tax. It's one of the most common incentives, and also to abate taxes, as well as some other incentive programs I'll go into in a little bit. So our zone was created in 1985. It's actually 3 years after the program was created by the state, so we have one of the older zones in the state of Illinois. And the state decided that all enterprise zones will end. So we're all in this together. Staff and community development have been working very closely with Champaign. Champaign also has an enterprise zone, and we've been working concurrently in this process. If we do not, it's not necessarily a reapplication, it's really we're applying for a new zone. So if we don't apply for a new zone, our current zone will expire in the middle of 2016. And we would actually have to bring a 6-month extension to council to realize that date, but hopefully we won't have to. So as I mentioned before, 2 of the ways that the enterprise zone works is that we offer a sales tax exemption on new construction material. So that's basically if you flip the building upside down and shake it, what doesn't come out are the kinds of things that are going to be sales tax exempt on their way into the building. It's generally administered, generally the contractors are actually recipient to it, and the savings are then passed on to the business or property owner in the cost of the renovations. It does exempt all sales tax, including local sales tax. However, the majority, of course, is the state's money that's being exempted. And in Urbana's particular situation, not having that Menards we thought we might be having by now, we're actually not really exempting as much local sales tax, perhaps as a community with more home and construction goods retail locations. The other major incentive is the property tax abatement. And I'll go into a little more detail later about how that's set up, but currently we elect to abate property taxes as a city, as does the county. We have a joint zone with Champaign County, and we together abate taxes on incremental value generated by projects. There are also other state level incentives that we do not administer locally, including utility tax exemptions and investment credits, but those are applied for directly to the state. But they are important for companies' site selection processes. We do frequently get calls from accountants and site consultants asking simply, is this address in an enterprise zone? It's a very common inquiry we receive. So looking at our current zone, the city of Urbana, as I mentioned before, abates taxes over a 5-year period. Champaign County will also abate taxes over 5 years for commercial projects. So City of Urbana will abate 5 years, whether it's commercial or industrial, Champaign County for 5. If it is an industrial project, then the county will continue that abatement through to a 10-year period. And currently our zones do not involve any sort of a residential abatement. There is a sliding scale to achieve those abatements. You either have to create a certain number of jobs or increase the assessed value of the property in order to qualify for those. So the incentive can be anything from 20% up to 100%, but the sliding rule is relatively easy to achieve. It was designed that way intentionally. Under the proposed zone, we are making an explicit effort to reach out to our taxing partners. There are a couple major reasons for this. One is that we would have a more potent incentive if we were able to collaborate more with our partners. That would include the school district in particular. The other is that if our incentive is more potent, we are able to offer abatements of more of the property tax bill than just our personal share, the cities that is, then we could effectively reduce that incentive over time. And there's another reason for that, and that is that the city gets no revenue when it's 100% abatement over a multi-year period, and a step-down process, I'll go into the details of it in a little bit, allows the city and other taxing partners to receive some revenue while the abatement is in effect, and it also doesn't slap the end user in the face at the end of that abatement period when they suddenly have a 100% tax bill. So what governments, agencies could participate in the enterprise zone? All of these parties we've had some initial discussions with. Champaign County would be a special and unique partner in that they would actually co-administer the zone with the city. That is not the case now. Champaign has a co-administered zone with the county. However, we have a zone that we administer specifically. I'll go into some reasons why we'd like to take that approach. The others all have the ability to participate just on the property tax abatements. It's totally voluntary, and it's really our best opportunity to show that our community is working together in a way that makes us better suited to be selected for a new zone than other communities in the state. This is our opportunity to shine as a community. The state is specifically looking for these kinds of cooperative efforts, so the more of our taxing partners we can get on board, the better. And in addition to those I mentioned that could actually be partners in the enterprise zone, the Economic Development Corporation has also been a partner in this process, and the Regional Planning Commission, which administers the enterprise zone on behalf of Champaign County, has also been involved in these talks. And Champaign is concurrently approaching their school board and their park district, and approaching in tandem with to Parkland College and CUMTD. So this really has been a whole team effort up to this point in terms of advancing this conversation. And as I mentioned before, the more parties involved, the deeper the property tax abatement we could offer in the first year. As I mentioned before, each district would have the ability to choose how it participates in the enterprise zone. There aren't a lot of restrictions in that regard, so we have sort of kept that to later in the process, and we're looking forward to hearing back from you all on how you think the city should participate, and we're looking forward to hearing back from each of the governing bodies of those organizations about their ideas for participation. As noted here, changes in the future of the zone to the incentives that are within local control, the sales tax abatement, can be amended in the future with minimal involvement from the state. Effectively, we need to notice them. So the districts that choose to participate will have the option of changing those abatements in the future. Of course, we'd like lots of notice when that happens, so we can notify any property owners who are receiving an abatement. Right now, the city focuses on only commercial and industrial corridors. However, there's been a lot of discussion, especially with the school district, about including single-family residential new construction. That would probably also include townhomes and condos, just like the Build Urbana program did. In fact, this may be the most viable opportunity the city has to reinstate a Build Urbana type program for the foreseeable future. If we do not make use of this opportunity, then we would have to go around and approach all the taxing partners again. There may be some advantages to this process as well. The council may not be aware, but our finance department certainly is, that there's a lot of hands-on processing in the Build Urbana program, because it's actually a rebate program, which means the money comes in and then it's redistributed. An abatement process is actually a notification we give proactively to the county clerk, and then those taxes are just never charged. So there's an administrative advantage to that as well. A joint application to the county will also give us the opportunity to extend our enterprise zone boundary out into the unincorporated areas just outside the city limits. And this is important because when we look at what Champaign's zone, how it performed, well, not so much how it performed, but when they had a project come in out on the edge of town, they had already proactively included some unincorporated areas that they expected to develop. In those instances, they did not have to apply for an amendment. So over the course of Champaign's enterprise zone life, they applied for 4 or 5 amendments. We applied for over 20, and it's a 6-month process to do that. Most recently, we did that for Frasca with their proposed expansion of their facility. So it puts the city at a disadvantage to work proactively with a developer or an employer who comes to you with a short timeline, says, I want to get going on this project, and we have to say, hold on, we have to go through a 6-month process to get you involved. And as many of you know, the time at which an employer might approach you and begin that conversation, they may not be willing to commit on paper to the state that now is the time that I'm ready to commit and sign on the dotted line that I'm going to commit to make all those jobs happen. So that's a real big benefit of partnering with the county in that way. This is the current boundary of the enterprise zone in orange. The red is the corporate boundary, and you can see it kind of has a squid-like look to it. And part of the reason for that is because of the amendment process I just described. As you can see, the zone was created and extended to include the major commercial and industrial areas in the city of Urbana, and that would be the strategy for the new zone. We don't have specific boundaries drawn yet. However, the goal would be to be as inclusive as possible of areas that we have deemed appropriate for commercial and industrial in our current zoning and in our comp plan, areas that we expect to grow and develop, have indicated that we want to see grow and develop, and also those areas outside the corporate boundary that fit that same criteria. In addition, existing subdivisions for single-family homes is also on the table for discussion as properties that we might want to see the kind of incentive offered under Build Urbana. This is an example of how what a qualifying criteria might look like. In this example, I'm going to talk about, I guess, commercial property, but these 2 criteria could also be applied to, of course, industrial, and the value could be for single family. But we're proposing a simple you're in or you're out approach to abatements. If you have a development that is going to increase the EAV, then you're in. Or if you have a development that's going to increase a set number of jobs. Those numbers aren't set in stone. They're just here as an example. But the reason we are proposing that is because the previous sliding scale, there was very few that actually landed in the middle of it. Most rapidly, easily exceeded the scale that existed. And in conversations with developers, they don't necessarily want to hear all about the gradations of your scale of what they might receive. There's generally an interest in what would I qualify for? What's the bright line to receive those incentives? One of the criteria there was job creation. We would propose using a full-time job creation definition that was forwarded by the state of Illinois in its small business job creation tax credit program. And we want to ensure that it is a full-time job and that it's of sufficient quality. And so here is a definition that is one possibility for how we could do that tied to the state. The proposed abatement schedule we've been discussing is a 5-year period, and it would begin after the increased assessed value appears on the tax roll. That's when you start the clock running. And it would decline by 20% over each of the 5 years. This is the stair-step model I mentioned before. And then, of course, in the 6th year, the value, the full value of that new increment is being enjoyed by all of the taxing partners. So again, this is that same example, assuming, or a little more detail on that example, assuming a base value of $100,000 before construction, creating increment of EAV of $200,000, a sizable project. Abatement lasts then 5 years, stepping down each year. And so in this example then, the city would continue to receive those taxes on that increment into the future. So here's another look at that same trend. The top is the revenue coming in. Maybe we should have put that on the bottom so you would have seen those rise up over that 5-year period. And then the red is what's being abated. The increment the city didn't receive when that new construction project just hit the tax rolls for the first time. And then this is a summary of that same data. In the example, again, the base value is $100,000 and the property value tripled. With the project, the city abates about $8,000 in taxes over that 5-year period, and then collects taxes in excess of what would have happened without the project over a 10-year period. So there's a net gain over a 10-year period. The city never pays anything in the model, and it only occurs on properties that actually have a project and apply for it. So it doesn't happen, you don't capture increment that happens from natural increases in property value. It's only on specific projects that qualify. So as was stated before, but in this specific example, if more taxing partners are participating, then the amount of the abatement in the short term goes up, but the stair-step model stays the same. And then, of course, everyone benefits over the long term of the project that has increased the tax base. So we're coming to you now to sort of lay out a lot of the information. I'm not even going to bore you with the details of the application process, which are quite tedious. We've been looking at this, I think it's nearly 2 years now that we've been talking about this, knowing it was coming, going to our Illinois Enterprise Zone Association conferences, hearing the latest from was being discussed at the time in the assembly when they were first crafting it. But we think we have charted a course through all the details of the application process and are now in the process. So we've had engagements with staff and study session level meetings with all the taxing partners that were mentioned before. And because this application is due at the end of the year, we need to have answers from all of our taxing partners about if they want to participate, and if so, what might that look like in October. And then we will begin the process of formal approvals either in October or November, with final approval needed in December in advance of that deadline. And again, if approved, our zone would take effect in January 1st, 2016. That would line up right with the expiration of our current zone. And if not, then the current zone would expire in June 30th, 2016 after a small extension. We could apply the following year, and we would, if we had to put a good proposal together, then we would reapply. It is a competitive process, but we're pretty confident that we're going to be able to put together a proposal that's going to make our community stand out, and that Champaign will have a similarly standout proposal as well.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
I just took 3 from your notes there. What would make our enterprise zone different from the previous year and make the application stand out with the current submission?
The level of participation with other taxing partners is one key that we're trying to work on. That's why we've been reaching out to everyone. Our current zone, we only have a partnership with Champaign County, so we don't have any other participation from other taxing partners in the zone itself.
Okay. And then was your example on the job creation 5, that was simply just a number you threw in for this presentation. That's not what you're putting in your application, right?
Not at this time, but the previous, just to give you a sense, the previous scale, the scale that's currently in effect for abatements, although these aren't really used because by the time a new project happens and it ends up on the tax rolls, there's not really any time to collect or to receive an abatement. 5 jobs gets you 20%, 6 gets you 40%, and it goes up from there. But the job creation side is only half of the equation. If you increase your assessed value by $7,500, you start at a 50% abatement, and then it goes up from there. So typically, a small amount of job creation and a modest amount of increase in value results in 100% abatement. Most of our abatements are 80 or 100%. So we tried to keep basically the outcome that we saw was what was proposed there, but as you mentioned, it is not what is going to be written to the application. As of yet, we're very interested in hearing more what others think and what other communities are doing.
Just one final. The application process itself, what you put in the application, instead of, well, not in addition to providing some incentive in job creation, for instance, is there a type of enterprise zone that would, in this case, we have a technology center in Champaign, for instance, at Research Park. Well, I would be interested in seeing a technology zone in Urbana. Would that be something that we could put into this application, and the other, parties would have to agree to that in order for us to put that there, or how does that actually work?
Well, one important note is that the Champaign has made significant use of their enterprise zone in the Research Park. And I believe those projects typically result in 10-year, 100% abatements. But it's only the city portion, I believe, or perhaps the county as well, but not a broad coalition. That property is also in the metro zone, so Urbana will eventually share in the tax revenue of those projects once those abatements end and those properties start paying property taxes. We have the ability to build a narrative around the enterprise zone and our use of it. However, the specifics of the mechanics of the incentive aren't very specific to use.
Okay.
It's more general for job creation or property value increase. However, the way in which we employ it, we can implement it in areas where we know it's going to have an impact. One important thing I failed to mention during my presentation was that when there's a TIF district in place, the enterprise zone, the abatement portion of it, is canceled out. You can't have both abatement and TIF incentives, but you can have a sales tax exemption and a TIF incentive. So you can still abate what is largely the state's revenue from the sales tax for that project in the TIF.
Thank you so much.
Eric.
Do you envisage that the map is going to look similar in the new zone, or do you think it'll look significantly different? And one of the things that causes me to ask that is you're talking about single-family residences, and the areas that might be ready for that might be in areas that are not on the current map, I would think, but maybe you can elucidate that point.
You're correct. The R zone, while you can't have a residential, or you can't have a residential function to an enterprise zone, R zone was created to service commercial and industrial properties and to encourage job creation and commercial and industrial development. So our current zone does not have really any neighborhoods in it or areas that would be slated for new construction. So the goal would be, again, based on the incentives. It's kind of odd. We're probably going to draw the map last. And the reason for that is we want to know what everybody, the kinds of things they want to incentivize, and then we'll draw the boundaries to try to capture that. So if new home construction is a goal, and the reason we focus on new home construction is because it actually generates increment and value. Unfortunately, renovation creates very little increment, if any. Sometimes you can spend a lot of money and have virtually no impact on the property value. New construction is very obvious when it happens. So we would look to subdivisions that are not fully built out, and also properties out on the edge of town that are either ripe for residential or commercial or industrial development.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one of the reasons our taxing partners are interested in the single-family abatement is a way to address that tax differential that we're facing now, and to look again, just the way Build Urbana was able to jumpstart some of our subdivisions, to find something that would give potential home buyers for the new homes some assistance in the early years. And that's something that our school district's very interested in, balancing the residential in Urbana and getting over the hurdle that we have in the tax differential, and starting up again with the subdivisions that have continued to build out, but not at the pace that we would like to see. So it's a little bit of an unusual use of the enterprise zone, but certainly permissible. So it would look very similar, I think, the boundaries to today, but with added territories, primarily in southeast Urbana and our newly developing areas. One other thing I would also note, they'll be setting the number of enterprise zones the same as exist today, right? So it's
That's right.
96, is that right?
96 or 97, that's
Yeah.
right.
So not everybody will be able to continue, and that's why we want to make sure we have an outstanding application. It's a really important economic development tool. There's like 2 of them that are available in Illinois of substance, enterprise zone and TIF, and we use both. And it is almost an expectation for commercial industrial development that when companies look to locate or expand, it's an expectation that you'll be able to offer some level of enterprise zone benefits for them. So we want to be able to continue to compete.
Mayor, then Bill.
Yeah, I think this is very important for us to bridge the gap, which is one of our key goals for the city council, to bring the tax rates down in Urbana. And the school district has been very enthusiastic about this. I have just a little technical question. On your example, where you had the $200,000 increment, what happens because of the normal increase, quote-unquote normal increase in assessed value just by inflation? How does that inflationary increase get treated?
It would just be captured by the abatement. We wouldn't attempt to thresh it out.
So
but
you assume that the improvement doesn't increase in value, you just take the initial improvement value?
No, we continue to take any value above the what the base is set at. And we actually coordinate with the assessor's office to look for that initial bump year.
Mm-hmm.
So then at that time, the previous assessment is what is used for the base. And then all value increase above, including any natural base of
okay.
the growth is captured. Now that, of course, happens in a TIF district. That happens district-wide, that any growth is captured even if there isn't a project happening. But with the enterprise zone, it's only limited to those parcels that have had that specific project that was approved for abatement.
Okay, thank you.
Bill?
I support the residential part too, because our areas that are already ready for houses. We don't have any additional costs from the city. We've already invested in the infrastructure, the sewers. We already plow the roads. We already take care of them. So it's really no extra cost to us. So anything that we can encourage to go in there is just kind of, extra for us. So giving a 5-year abatement makes sense, I think, on the residential. I did have a couple questions on your example. Was that must have been a partial abatement because my property taxes are higher than that. My house isn't worth $300,000. Was that like a?
It was just the city portion.
Oh, that was just the city portion. So then, for people that do want to just build onto an existing house and increase the footprint of their house, isn't there still some kind of a 5-year abatement for that, where if you expand your house, I think you can abate most of your property taxes or get some kind of a 5-year? Do you know what I'm
Under
talking
our
about?
current enterprise zone, we have no residential, unless it's a mixed use. There's no residential.
This isn't enterprise zone. I think it's for anybody, but
Just the property taxes.
it's just, yeah,
Freeze, yeah.
that's still good for anybody. I mean, so, just keep that in mind. If you're thinking about expanding your house, you don't wait for the enterprise zone. But I do have a question about like how the dates line up too. Is there since we have something now and it's expiring, is there a risk of people waiting to see if this is going to pass and not doing anything for 2 years, or is there some way to bridge that gap?
I suppose it's a possibility. There won't be a gap if we're approved. However, we will not know if we're approved until September of 2015, I think, is when the state said they would let us know. But everybody's in this boat statewide. There are technically a few things we could do. Under our home rule authority, we can abate taxes. So if it was a really big project we couldn't bear seeing go, we would go through a special process to trigger an abatement. But that would take a special large project to require that. One question that's come up a lot is, what about incentives that started under the old zone, and could they be extended to the new? In general, the answer appears to be no. There are some communities that are kind of exploring how they might tiptoe around that. We're fortunate in that we've notified everyone whose abatement would be ended prematurely, and we've received no complaints. There wasn't anybody who really got a bad surprise by this, I guess. That the abatements weren't absolutely crucial to the projects. The sales tax exemption is crucial on a number of current projects, including Illinois American Water's $1.7 million redevelopment up on Cardinal Court for their new headquarters that they're relocating, consolidating employees, 40 new employees in Urbana as a result of that project.
But that's not going away.
That is not going away.
Yeah, okay. Mike, and then I'll have a small question.
So there was one question I wanted to ask, and now I'm just going to re-ask it. I'm not sure what you said there about projects toward the end of the existing enterprise zone.
Mm-hmm.
So a project that happens in 2015 will only realize 1 year of abatement. So any project that's consummated prior to the expiration of the zone cannot continue beyond the zone. The expiration of the
That's
zone.
the basic read we've received at the conferences. Actually, our fall conference is coming up, so there'll be another round of officials from the Department of Revenue being peppered with questions from enterprise zone administrators around the state. I know this will come up again, but the answer before was no. However, there are administrators and attorneys in the state who think that you can kind of come up with creative ways to get around it. I think we'll only really look at those options if we have a project we need to make happen.
Okay.
Who needs that kind of abatement to make happen?
And then, okay, the red line is the proposed enterprise zone, or what is the red line again?
That's the city.
That's just the city boundary, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So in Behringer Commons, there's some kind of abatement program now, correct?
That's correct.
So how would something like this impact that? Is it totally separate, or, I mean, obviously it's not within the enterprise zone now, but if it's expanded to residential, how do those two, what happens there?
That's a good question for that specific project, because Build Urbana no one new is being admitted into it, so that one's easy. Behringer, I think, continues a little longer. We probably should run the scenario and see which is better for the property owner and allow them to choose the option that benefits them the most.
I think the existing arrangement would be more beneficial, would be my thought. I know it definitely was for Build Urbana, and we're talking about that step-down incentive, but we can certainly look at that when we look at the boundaries.
I was just curious, since there's that existing program there that's somewhat unique in the city, I think, and wasn't that like a 7-year
Yeah.
abatement to the county?
7-year abatement, and that had to do with the annexation of the subdivision.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
New homeowners would also benefit from that sales tax exemption as well. It's a pretty good discount on the cost of your new home.
And then I have a small question going back to Carol's on talking about employment. So you haven't set a particular number yet. Are you playing with a range of what, 5 to 10 or something, or?
For the number of years of the
No,
abatement?
for employment, for a number of for the
Yes.
number of new jobs created.
Right. We were intentionally setting the bar lower based on the utilization of the zone and in the
So
previous-
using historical data. Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so you suspect it will be something like 5.
That was our inclination.
Okay.
But we haven't set it yet.
And then how would you track the creation of these jobs over time? And how long would they have to maintain them?
Well, ideally, they'd maintain them during the life of the abatement, which would be 5 years. We haven't established exactly what that procedure would be. In the past, when the Department of Commerce, DCEO, ran this, they required an annual reporting in which we would call every property owner who was currently receiving a enterprise zone incentive that would be either sales tax exemption or currently receiving an abatement, and we would call them and ask them what their employment numbers were. And with the changeover, because there were changes to the zone right away in 2013, as soon as the legislation passed, there were immediate changes to the zone, and one was that the reporting requirements changed. In some ways, they're much more efficient, but oddly enough, we're no longer required to do these, actually it was quarterly reports, to where we would call every person receiving a abatement or a sales tax exemption in the zone. We still require, we actually still require some of that reporting internally, but we've kind of kept it open in terms of how we'll handle it. But I think that the quarterly reporting is not an overly burdensome method. A direct contact from staff is certainly one option, so what we've done in the past.
Okay. Other questions? Mayor?
Yeah, Bill raised an interesting question about the existing property tax rules. So if somebody was going to remodel their house, it would have to be like a $100,000 change to the house. But there are existing benefits. If you're going to do remodeling, you get tax breaks in the existing property tax code. So would people get sort of double benefits then if they're doing a remodeling?
Well, I think the intent was to write the zone benefits for new construction.
Okay, so
and
it
not to
does not
focus
include
redevelopment.
remodeling.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Brandon or Libby on this? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Well, it's an important topic, and we'll be seeing a lot of it over the next 3 months, I take it. Yeah.
Yes, certainly will. Thank you for your time.
Okay, that's it for presentations. We're up to item number 8 on the agenda, ordinance number 2014-09090, an ordinance amending the zoning map of the city of Urbana, Illinois, adjusting the boundaries of the Boneyard Creek Overlay District, Plan Case 2239M14. Kevin Garcia is here to talk about it, but he did pass out some maps. Everybody got their maps? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I'm a little bit under the weather, so please bear with me. But I won't actually pass out. I'll just pass out these amended things. So as you'll recall, last week, the City Council considered at their meeting an amendment to the zoning map to change the boundaries of the Boneyard Creek District to reflect those recent changes in the FEMA flood insurance maps. And just as a refresher, that amendment would have resulted in the removal of 50 parcels from the Boneyard Creek District, which would no longer be touching the floodplain, and an addition of 21 parcels that were touching the floodplain. And so based on feedback that we got from City Council at that meeting, staff came up with some revised criteria for selecting parcels to either include or exclude. And so basically what we did, we looked at the buildable area of parcels as opposed to just the entire parcel boundary. So the buildable area would just, you would take the setbacks and remove those from the parcel boundaries. And then we said that we would recommend including those parcels who had buildable area that was touched by the 100-year floodplain. And then we would not be recommending inclusion of those parcels where the floodplain was only touching their setback area because they couldn't build in those areas anyway. So now the revision based on these criteria would result in actually 8 of the parcels that we had proposed for inclusion would no longer be proposed for inclusion. So there would be a net increase of 13. In the memo it said 7 parcels, but we went and did a second pass just to make sure we were doing proper quality control. And an additional property at 301 West Griggs Street was found to meet the criteria so that it would not be included in our recommendation. So in front of you, you have the revised maps and ordinance, which really focus on the detail of just the areas that we're actually looking at. So that's basically it for what we did to actually remap. Just wanted to address two other items. We really appreciated as staff the City Council comments, and we feel that we did come up with better criteria as a result. So there were 2 points that were raised during last week's meeting that we just wanted to cover a little bit. So one of the points had to deal with actually revising the regulations of the district, and I think staff is in agreement that that the regulations of the Boneyard Creek District are probably in need of an update, and we would be more than willing to do that in the future, especially as we get more staff, and then we can devote more staff time to that. So that would be a worthwhile thing for us to pursue. The second point that was raised was there's probably a need to update the 78 Boneyard Creek Master Plan for the areas that are outside of the scope of the 2008 Master Plan. And that's certainly something that might be a longer term project, certainly once we could identify a funding source, but we just wanted to point out that we thought that would be a worthwhile thing to pursue as well. So as far as the recommendation, we feel that it is important to update the Boneyard Creek District to reflect the current realities of these new floodplains that we adopted just last year. And just in terms of being, I guess, current in, if somebody comes in with a project and their parcel really should not be in the district anymore, we feel it's a good idea to get this boundary updated so that they wouldn't have to go through the extra steps of regulation of being in the district. And likewise for those 13 properties that should be included from our recommendation, we feel that it's just important to get these boundaries up to date so that we can make sure that we're staying consistent with, with the general thrust and and so forth of the initial creation of the district. So really updating the boundaries is a first step, and then later on we're thinking that we could look at the actual regulations, and then perhaps further down the road look at updating that master plan for the other areas. So really that concludes my report. If there are any questions or discussion, I would be more than happy to help answer those.
Just going to ask one real quick one here. The rear setback line is 5 feet or 10 feet?
It all depends on where you're looking. Are you looking at Main Street?
Yeah.
That one is 10 feet.
It's 10 feet.
I
Okay,
believe.
thank you.
Yeah.
Eric.
So this is really important to my ward, and I'm really ignorant about the issues. I missed the meeting last week, and I haven't had previous occasion to consider the implications to the property owner of being in the Boneyard Creek district or not. So I wonder if you could quickly summarize those, and maybe it's worth separate conversation offline. But if you can quickly summarize those.
Yeah, I mean, so in a nutshell, what you have to do if you're in the Boneyard Creek district and you want to do any sort of construction, like adding onto a house or demolition or building within the floodplain or anything like that, is you would have to come in to the city and get a creekway permit. And now creekway permits can be approved in as little as a couple of weeks if you're not doing anything that's deemed like a really big project, I guess, for lack of having the technical terms right in front of me. But so the creekway permits are reviewed by our zoning administrator, by our city engineer, and then by a creekway commissioner, who's a mayoral appointee who serves for 3 years. And then so those three would review the permit application, and then, like I said, if it's not a huge project, it can be approved in a couple weeks administratively in-house. I think the cost is $125 to apply for that permit. Other than that, since that's just the overlay district part of it, and then they just have to comply with all the underlying zoning. If they're asking to use a lot of the bonus provisions, there are these bonus provisions which I could get into if you like, or not. But if a project is asking for a lot of bonus provisions, then it'll probably get kicked to the plan commission if it's a major project, and then the plan commission would review it and then either approve or deny that permit, the creekway permit.
Will people who are now have been added to the Boneyard Creek district because they are now judged to be in the floodplain and they weren't before, can they expect their homeowners' insurance rates to rise as a consequence of that?
No. The insurance rates are based on whether or not your house is actually in the floodplain or not. And so the Boneyard Creek district it's really separate from flood insurance requirements. So if a home's going to be required to have flood insurance, that's like a federal requirement and not something that the city deals with, and certainly not something that the Boneyard Creek district deals with.
But I'm talking about a property whose status has changed from not being in the district to being in the district, because it's now judged that that they're now in the floodplain and they didn't used to be.
Well, if their home is not in the floodplain, so it's kind of complicated. The district is based on parcel boundaries, and the floodplain is sort of this wavy line that winds around the creek and such. So and they're separate. So your building could be on a parcel that's within the Boneyard Creek district, but it's not going. But if it doesn't touch the floodplain, then it's not going to be required to have any flood insurance.
Okay.
Charlie?
Might make it clearer to Eric. One of your constituents came and had questions, but her property's been taken out, correct?
I
Dorothy
think
Newman?
yes, and
Yeah.
that was actually a result of the
The
second
review,
the second
yeah.
pass of quality control. Her property happens to be on a corner lot, and the initial pass we had accidentally treated the side that borders Wood Street as a side yard, which has a smaller setback. But since it's a corner lot, that's actually a front yard, so it's got a further setback. So the floodplain doesn't actually touch the buildable area of that site.
So they took out 8 properties.
Eight properties more. Note that, how many were in the original?
The
you've all-
original,
You took out how many to start with?
So we're proposing to remove 50 properties from the Boneyard Creek district, and that hasn't changed. We had originally proposed to add 21. Now we're only proposing to add 13.
Okay, these criteria are a little tighter than what we had last week. Bill?
Yeah, I appreciate the memo from staff, and communications have explained that you did the extra historical research and found that the criteria originally used wasn't just the floodplain, but they were considering proximity to the boneyard. I guess one of the original goals was to allow access to the creek itself, to maintain it, because eventually those steel pilings will wear out and they'll have to be replaced. And then one of the other goals, I guess, is to get additional right-of-way. So if we don't put in new pilings and new fences, then we might want to regrade the side of the boneyard and make it more attractive, or put it in a culvert or something. All that will have to be worked out, I guess, with a flood management plan. So I appreciate you coming up with rigid criteria so that it can be unbiased and everything, but I think it's only addressing part of the goals of the Boneyard District, which would also include some kind of corridor development between campus and downtown. But I think it's better than the way it is now. I think a lot of the properties that you identified downtown were never in any floodplain, so it makes sense, and they aren't that close to the boneyard. There are a couple properties that are right next to the boneyard that I don't think it makes a lot of sense to remove, but I guess given the rigid criteria that we need to abide by, removing the Denny's property and the property at 208 Griggs, the old Carl printing place, which is right there on the on the new improvement, overlooking the new improvement. You could have a balcony right there on the walkway, but it's not going to be in our boneyard district. It seems a little weird, but I understand the criteria. So unless you think we could add that as a criteria, if you're on the boneyard, couldn't we just would that be extending the criteria too much to say if you're right on the boneyard, you should be in the district?
I think we're trying to complete the process where we had a lot of public input on what being in the district meant and didn't mean. And, unless these property owners were part of the original addition, and I'm not sure if that's the case, or if they were told they'd be removed and now they're not, and they're not here tonight. I think we have a very defensible criteria. There were grand plans in the late 70s that we didn't achieve, and the functionality of the Boneyard Creek District has been more about the flood zone and flood protection than achieving the master plan. If we're able to update the regulations and update the master plan, perhaps then we would have a different district that fulfilled a different purpose. That's not much of an answer. I guess if we were to change that criteria, we probably should step back and let people know a little more about what we're doing. So we're very interested in moving this forward just so that we have better compatibility of the updated flood zone maps with our zoning district the way we use it now.
Carol?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to actually put a motion to move ordinance number 2014-09090 to council with a recommendation for approval.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Carol, seconded by Eric. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It goes to council. Thank you very much. Next up is Resolution 2014-947R, a resolution approving an agreement for engineering services with Hanson Professional Services Incorporated, North Lincoln Avenue improvements. Bill Gray is here to speak to this.
Thank you. Earlier this summer, the Illinois Department of Transportation approved the North Lincoln Avenue project design supplement, and we then met with Hanson Professional Services to seek a proposal to provide design engineering services, final design, prepare plans and specifications for us to move forward with this 1 mile stretch of North Lincoln Avenue between Saline Court and the proposed Olympian Drive. So in the packet is their proposal. Their fees are estimated to be $222,438. The county, Champaign County, and the city of Urbana, per a earlier intergovernmental agreement, are equal partners in paying for all the local share. There are no grant monies to pay for these fees. So the county and the city would each split that, the fees for these services. There was an earlier public meeting that was held at the Civic Center to talk about the plan before it was finally approved by the Illinois Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration. What is before you tonight is recommendation to proceed with the design with the 2-lane highway, which is two of the future someday 4-lane highway design for this roadway. I included the meeting exhibits just for your information. It shows the 4-lane and the 2-lane, what that would look like. Those are the back two exhibits. I have the posters here if you'd like to see a larger scale of that. We recommend that our portion of these fees would be paid out of state and motor fuel tax revenues. So that would be the funding source for what I would recommend is $120,000 in case there are any change orders or different unanticipated fees that might come about in the months ahead as we do our design.
Questions for Bill? Okay, well then I'll jump into my comment. I sent around email and I handed out a memo that I put together, and my apologies for coming to this in this understanding that I've had in a late fashion. And, basically I don't understand why we would need a 4-lane road here and instead would propose a 3-lane road. And I would beg the committee's indulgence to be able to sit down with Bill, go over my memo, go over the plans, try to understand this better, so that I can support it or not, based on that understanding. Bill got this at 4:20 today, and he hasn't had a chance to think about it and respond to it. I would like to keep this in committee for 2 weeks if folks agree. If folks don't agree with me, that's fine too. You can send it to council. But I would appreciate a motion keeping this in committee.
So would an alternative here be to, I mean, I don't know if time is of the essence or if a 2-week delay is okay, but maybe an alternative would be to move it to the council with no recommendation and then flesh out your concerns over the week, or is that too tight of a time frame to review all this?
The next council meeting is actually I'm trying to think, we don't have a meeting on the 29th, so it's the following week. So there is a 2-week period that I think we could discuss between now and then, if that's your question. I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of the calendar that way. You're right.
Yeah, that works for me. Carol.
So if it's okay with Mr. Gray, then I would make the motion that Resolution 2014-09-047R remain in committee for the next committee of the whole.
If the question is time of the essence, no, I can't say time is of the essence. I mean, we need to move forward. We'd like to go to a letting if we're moving forward, next year. We'd like to have this construction hopefully end similar to the summer 2016 Olympian Drive construction. So we're trying to get both projects in sync. But no, these 2 weeks delay or whatever be an issue or critical, no.
So that's the motion, is to officially keep them in committee.
Is there a second? Motion.
I'll second it.
Oh, you'll second it. Okay. So we have a motion just to keep this in committee. Eric, you have a question?
Well, so I guess just a comment to be thinking about and coming back. I'm assuming that the projection of a 4-lane road is based on some kind of projection of development patterns along the road and consequent traffic. So, so I guess one of the key elements in dealing with Charlie's concerns is are those projections realistic, and how do they compare with similar? I guess one of the things that I would think it would be comparable to, I'm an old timer, so I remember that South Neal Street got broadened to 4 lanes because it was judged to be necessary because of all that development. So I guess the question is, are we projecting that level of development in the reasonably near future?
It's always difficult to see cornfields and picture that to be developed 20, 40, 50 years from now. As transportation planners, when we look at certain roadway classifications, in this case an arterial roadway, this is where we do want traffic to be concentrated if and when growth occurs. It's always difficult to know those patterns, how quickly development will occur, but it's prudent to plan for, if you will, the ultimate build-out. Okay, so at some distant time, can you picture full build-out to Fort Harris Road or Leverett Road? I mean, if you could picture that, Lincoln Avenue, I can assure you, would need to be a 4-lane highway. If that never is going to occur, and we have development controls and through community development or other restrictions, we don't want that ever to occur, well then I would agree. We shouldn't be looking for that, because on the Champaign side, on the Urbana side of the tracks, we're probably not going to see those sorts of trips being generated. But to your point, there are many examples of roads that perhaps were 2 lanes and eventually were expanded to 4 lanes in Champaign, Urbana, based on growth. It's just hard to anticipate that. But we can meet and talk about it. I think Charlie raises some interesting points and comments, and come back to you in 3 weeks, I guess.
So just to add to that, I envision meeting with Bill and maybe trying to address these issues and put it in an additional memo that goes over the whys and why nots of different scenarios. Bill?
Yeah, just for clarification, this engineering would be for 2 lanes, but the appraisals for property would be to acquire the right-of-way for 4 lanes? For
That's
future-
correct.
And then as far as the earthwork goes, that would just be for 2 lanes?
Correct.
And if we ended up doing 4 lanes, all the earthwork would have to be redone? I mean, it would have to be added to one side, like, kind of like what they're doing on 150 now?
Yes.
So, there was a third question I forgot. Okay, I'll think of it in 3 weeks.
Sure. Maybe sooner.
All right.
Just send it to us. Incorporate it in the memo. I guess, my big concern is not having a shoulder on one side of the road as proposed. That's probably my biggest concern, immediate concern. And so that's one of the things I want to explore here and understand what can be done to remedy that. So, any further questions? Mayor?
We were talking about maybe having some money left over from another project that could be applied to this. So would IDOT have some standard that would dictate that we should plan for 4 lanes instead of for 3 lanes?
Yes, I think that's part of the discussion if we're going to go this route. Federal Highway and IDOT would weigh in. I think even the community as a whole would want to weigh in to some degree. That's part of the long-range transportation plan. They're showing it, as a 4-lane ultimate build-out. But to your question about, or comment about leftover dollars, just this past week I've contacted Representative Jacobson and Senator Frerich's office to send a letter to the Secretary of Transportation requesting that if there are, and in our projections appears to be a substantial amount of unspent Illinois Jobs Now money that would be left over from what we call Project A, which is the current project under construction between Apollo Drive and Lincoln Avenue, and Project C, which is about a 1/3 mile at the far west end by Duncan. We think good bids, et cetera, we may have as high as $1.7 million unspent in Illinois Jobs Now money that if we ultimately had Secretary of Transportation approval, that money could be sent to Lincoln Avenue. And the nexus or reason for that is in the public engagement process, it was strongly discussed that Lincoln Avenue be improved at the same time we do the Olympian Drive. So there's that connectivity, if you will. So right now, the county and the city are poised, with no additional dollars. About, our estimates are $1.1 million out of, our share and the county share. Well, if there's 1.7 million, and again, these are estimates, but if that money was forwarded to Lincoln Avenue, our 1.1 million minus $850,000, would be, $250,000 would be our share versus 1.1 million. So that's a significant improvement in our cash availability to address other roads in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so it stays in committee. And Bill and I will work on something here. Next up is Resolution 2014-948R, resolution approving an agreement for reimbursable utility adjustment with Ameren Illinois Company doing business as Ameren Illinois for Olympian Drive improvements at Duncan Road. Bill?
Well, you may think, why are we involved with a project in Champaign? But this goes back to the city of Urbana as the lead agency for the Olympian Drive project. So that's why this is before you this evening. The project design is essentially completed. We're in the land acquisition stage for this piece of Olympian Drive at the far west end. I included a picture, and this is that Clearview subdivision, which is west of Mattis Road out toward Duncan. And there is a Ameren pole line, north-south orientation on Duncan Road that's conflicts with the new intersection with Duncan and Olympian Drive. Ameren has identified about a $14,000 cost to move this pole line out of the new roadway improvements. The money to pay for the new utility relocations would be coming from Illinois Jobs Now money that's available to us. The mayor would be the person that I'm recommending to be authorized to sign this Ameren agreement, and basically we would be billed for the work once the work is completed. So it's pretty much a standard utility relocation work. It's just that we're the ones being asked to sign it since we're the lead agency, but we would not pay any city dollars for this work.
Any questions for Bill? Is there a motion? Carol?
I'd like to move resolution number 2014-09-048R to City Council with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
Moved by Carol, seconded by, I heard two voices, Eric, or yeah, I guess Eric. Further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Goes to council. Last up is Resolution 2014-949R, resolution approving a collective bargaining agreement with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFL-CIO, Council 31, Local 1331, for July 1, 2013 through June 30, 2016. And Mayor or Jim, somebody want to address this?
Well, I'll maybe
Oh,
start
oh,
and others
okay,
can
Bill.
augment my comments. In the packet is a draft resolution which would authorize, the mayor and clerk to sign the bargaining agreement. We obviously did not attach the agreement details itself, as those particulars were discussed at closed session this evening. It would be our intention to provide the final contract language, in the next packet for council, which is largely what we discussed this evening. And then you would know all the contract changes and particulars, including non-economic related contract changes. I don't know if you want to say anything more. But
Mayor?
The thing I'd like to add is it was approved by the union.
Yes.
Carol?
I'd like to also send this one to council with a recommendation for approval.
I'll second that.
Moved by Carol, seconded by Eric. Further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
That motion passes. Seeing no further business, we are adjourned.